of the Senate Economics Legislation Committee, Inquiry into the Treasury Laws Amendment, News, Media and Digital Platforms Mandatory Bargaining Code Bill 2020. Just for everybody who is watching's information, obviously we are running a little behind schedule. The committee met during the break and determined that Treasury and the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications would both be moved to our hearing on the 1st. We will continue with the program as otherwise circulated, so we'll move next to commercial TV, then the public media panel involving the ABC and SBS, and then we will finish with the ACCC. We are still aiming to finish approximately around 4:30 p.m, but that may push to 5 p.m. if required. But I will now reopen the hearing and welcome representatives from Free TV. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. Information on procedural rules governing public hearings has been provided to witnesses and is available from the Secretariat. Witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphone to assist Hansard to record proceedings. And can we also try to ensure that microphones are set to mute if you are not speaking. I'll remind you that answers to questions on notice are required by close of business Monday 1 February. I will ask you to make a brief opening statement, but before you do so, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear for the Hansard record?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Greg Highwood. I'm the Chair of Free TV Australia, which represents commercial broadcasters in this country. I'm accompanied by our CEO, Bridget Fair, and our Director of Broadcast Policy, Ross Mitchell.
Great, thanks and welcome to you all. Do you wish to make an opening statement, Mr Highwood?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll just a few minutes just to outline some specific issues, the general context and some specific issues relevant to TV broadcasting. We would certainly like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee and discuss this very important piece of legislation. We're here to support just a very simple proposition, and that proposition is that the digital platforms that benefit from valuable news content should pay a fair price for that content. Free TV broadcasters spend over $360 million annually in producing high-quality news and current affairs content. This investment supports the employment of local journalists from Broome to Byron, from Townsville to Tasmania. Commercial television broadcasters produce 486 hours of news and current affairs content every week. Television remains the main way Australians get their news. 6.5 million Australians tune into commercial TV and current affairs every day, and 75% of Australians nominate commercial television as a trusted source of news. This has never been better demonstrated than during the COVID-19 pandemic. Audience percentages of 15 to 20% during the peaks of the COVID-19 and bushfire crises saw Australians turn to commercial television in times of uncertainty. At the height of the pandemic, over 14 million Australians were tuning into our news services in search of reliable information and verified facts. We believe that in a well-functioning democracy, there is a responsibility that falls on the businesses that become gateways between the community and information. This is a responsibility well understood by commercial TV broadcasters. For decades, as an influential media platform, we have operated under a regulatory compact that requires us to pay broadcast licence fees, spectrum fees, and meet stringent content obligations. And our community now expects similar regulation for businesses of the size and influence of Google and Facebook. This legislation puts forward the entirely reasonable proposition that as gateway businesses that are collecting data and monetising news content, Facebook and Google must pay a fair price for the quality news content that they use. And this price should be agreed by the parties through a genuine commercial negotiation under a framework that addresses the unprecedented imbalance in bargaining power enjoyed by the platforms. So Free TV strongly supports the News Media Bargaining Code, and we urge this committee to recommend its passage. In supporting the legislation, there are 5 key amendments that we recommend that will ensure the code works as intended, and I'll briefly outline these before taking questions. First, the code must cover all digital platform services that Australians rely on to access news, including Facebook Newsfeed, Instagram, Google Search and Google News. Second, the final legislation must treat all forms of media equally, and some changes are required to ensure that all news content created by TV broadcasters is covered by the code. Third, the protections for news media companies against punitive responses by Google and Facebook should be strengthened and expanded to the full range of products and services offered by Facebook and Google. Fourth, final offer arbitration must be retained as a key element of the package, but in retaining this important deadlock breaking mechanism, further guidance should be given to the arbitration panel in how to take account of the public interest benefit of news content. And finally, the incentive for the platforms to withhold their data collection practices from all registered news media businesses must be removed from the minimum standards. Similarly, the information exchange that currently occurs at the start of arbitration should be brought forward to the commencement of the commercial bargaining process to encourage negotiated outcomes. My colleagues and I are happy to expand on these proposed amendments and take any questions that the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll go straight to Deputy Chair, Senator Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair. Would you be able to quantify what value Google and Facebook get out of reusing or accessing your news feeds?
Look, it's very hard to as previous media speakers from the media indicated, it's very hard to exactly, quantify that. But certainly the internet per se is a very important distribution platform for content. It came into existence in the early 90s and has grown exponentially as a public platform for the expression of news, information and opinion, and anybody and any organisation that is producing news content uses the internet via Google and potentially other search engines to get that content distributed as widely as possible.
So just to spin that question around a bit, do you think that Google have an algorithm which would be able to quantify what value your news services are bringing to their advertising revenue?
I would imagine that they would have a very good sense. I think that the ACCC estimated that something between, in its original report, something between 13 and 18% of traffic into the platforms comes from news-related services. And given the fact that they are the gatekeeper to the internet for most people and are monopoly gatekeepers, and they have very sophisticated technology and experience in developing algorithms, I think they would have a pretty decent sense of the value of that content.
And
Senator, just to add to that, if I may, answering your question is some of the core work of this mandatory code that we're considering today. There are provisions in the code that will assist the parties uncover the information that's required to answer your question. So there is this information exchange between the parties that's required, and that goes to data. I mean, what we're really talking about here is the data that Google and Facebook collect from the users of news content. And at the moment, the reason we can't answer your question specifically to a dollar value is because we don't know the types of data that they collect from news consumers, and we don't know how they use that to monetize our content and to direct advertising. So that's sort of core work of the code itself, is helping us to answer that question.
What do you say to the criticism that this code may allow people to register as news organisations and simply clip a ticket off Google or Facebook's revenue?
Well, there is the ability clearly to negotiate, and I mean, I don't think that any man on coming off the street who's got an opinion would be able to effectively negotiate an outcome, particularly under a final offer arbitration model.
Okay, and
sorry, just to add, Senator, I mean there are a whole range of thresholds that you have to clear before you can register with the media regulator as a registered news business. So we go to things like having professional editorial standards. You've got to have a revenue threshold, you've got to have an audience test, you've got a content test. So there are a range of thresholds that you have to meet. You can't just simply register any old website from your basement and start clipping the ticket, as you say.
And 150,000 of turnover, is it? Yeah. So the code has been negotiated over a significant period of time. From your organisation's perspective, where have been the main hold-ups? I mean, have you been given enough information to make your position clear? The ACCC and Treasury, Google and Facebook, where is the intransigence that's not allowing this to come to fruition?
We don't know. We represent a range of members, metropolitan commercial broadcasters and regional broadcasters, all of whom have had various discussions, commercial in confidence discussions with Google and Facebook. We're not provided the details of those, and those are, as I say, company by company negotiations. But certainly, our understanding is that there has been very little willingness of the platforms to come up with a dimension of recompense for content that adequately reflects our members' view of the value of that content.
So Google's argued there's no valid reason why news content should receive preferential treatment by means of the code as compared to any other content that's accessed via search results. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, news content, as the ACCC said in its report, provides a very substantial proportion of overall traffic into the sites. And Google and Facebook live off advertising, and the traffic that news content delivers and the people, fundamentally the people and their wallets and their advertising budgets that that content delivers into those platforms is enormously valuable. And it's not like, well, let's look at it like this. If you're selling an item and you do it via Google and you advertise it via Google, you will pay for the advertising, but you will get the full economic value for that item. What Google does is that because they're the gatekeeper, our members put their content up, and because that content is designed to attract advertising, that it goes up on those platforms, Google is in the position, and Facebook is in the position to take the majority of the economic benefit of that content. So it is a very different relationship that our members have, because content both delivers an enormous amount of traffic, but then the platforms take the majority of the economic benefit from that traffic.
So would you have any fear of unintended consequences arising out of the mandatory code?
Well, look, I think in any piece of new legislation, it goes into the marketplace, the players test it, and over time it comes under review as any piece of legislation would. So we don't know if there's unintended consequences, but we're certainly of the view that it's beyond time for these arrangements to be put in place, given the very significant consequences that the drain on advertising dollars has had on public interest journalism. And I think that the print panel went through their experience with this, and certainly our members are finding it as well. I think if in the sweep of history, what we've had with the development of the internet is a new technology which was radical in terms of its ability to people to search information, but it also had an enormous transactional power. And it was the unintended consequence was that monopoly gatekeepers occurred, and monopolies developed. And the history of monopolies show that monopolies are either broken up or regulated. It happened to the oil companies in the early 20th century. It happened to the big American telcos in the 1970s. And we all know the consequences of monopoly power and the distortion it has on the allocation of economic resources. And that's what we're facing at the moment. We're facing two very large monopolies who are, as you would expect, fighting to retain that monopoly power, but it's beyond the point now where the community can really accept the consequences of that monopoly power.
Okay, and finally from me, is this a market that's rising all the time and should be able to lift all boats? I mean, is there a finite growth in this market here? Isn't there enough for everybody?
The advertising market, you're saying, Senator?
Sorry?
The advertising market?
Yes.
Well, look, the advertising market does grow with economic growth, but what we've seen over recent years is that the development of the digital advertising market, which is distinct from the broadcasting advertising market or the print advertising market, has been swallowed up by Google and Facebook. So they're taking between 80 and 90% of the growth in the digital advertising market, which is squeezing the ability of media companies to generate the revenue that they need to pay for the public interest journalism that they provide.
And clearly, from your perspective, they're not sharing.
Well, no, they're not sharing. I mean, they're businesses. They're keeping their revenue to themselves, and it's our view is, like others, that a legislative response is the only response that's really going to change the nature of this marketplace.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Bragg, I believe you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to play back some of the things that have been said today by the big tech organisations and get your reaction. So the first substantive issue was Google's position, which effectively is we don't want to have this code. Our solution is Google Showcase, but we can't show you that because it's unavailable in Australia. And that is, I would say, a bit of a column of smoke. It's very hard to grapple with something that isn't even available in the market. So what is your response to that? I mean, is that a correct? I mean, it looks to me as if it's a strategy to avoid really doing too much. If they were serious, they would have brought it into the market, or at least in a serious way in their negotiations with you. So what can you say to this?
Look, I might get Bridget to talk about that in a bit of detail, but the general point is that over many years, as Google has become under increasing pressure to do something about this issue, it's come up with a range of ad hoc proposals which tend to come to little or nothing. And the experience of the industry is that Showcase is another one of those little or nothing experiences. Fundamentally, for the code to work, it has to provide a very substantial material amount of money that meets the needs of the generators of news and current affairs content. Bridget?
I'll just add to that. In some ways, it doesn't really matter whether the solution's Google, Showcase or something else. What the ACCC is pointing to here is that we don't have a functioning market. We've got players who've got, there's a massive bargaining imbalance between the negotiating parties. And what we're trying to do is have a regulatory framework which is a proxy for a functioning market. And then we can be negotiating in a real way about the range of solutions that the platforms may wish to offer. And, parties will reach outcomes based on their commercial interests. So in some ways, Google Showcase is really a red herring.
Well, as you know, the policy of the government is to get the participants to the table so that there can be a market-based solution. Without the threat of the code, there wouldn't be, it appears, any serious discussion. So I guess if Google is saying Showcase is our preferred position, and the newspaper outlets were here before were saying that they didn't think that Showcase had worked in other jurisdictions, what are they offering you? Are they offering you a look at this Showcase concept? The reason I'm honing in on this is because we spent almost 2 hours with them this morning, and that is their solution. So it's important that we interrogate this with you. So what are they saying to you about Showcase?
Just before we get to what they're saying about Showcase, the point of this is that there is value in the way that news is being used in the products that they already have. And that's what the ACCC has been looking into. And I don't think it's proposed that you wouldn't receive all these pieces of content when you do a Google search, or, that people are using news content. Well, it is partly being proposed because they're saying they're going to exit the market. But as the products stand at the moment, there is value in the news content in the way that it's being used on the products that are there at the moment. So Google Showcase is, all well and good if it ever eventuates. But, what this code is about and what the ACCC's inquiry was about is the fact that there is already usage of news content and value in news content that is, not being realised in terms of negotiations between the parties. And as you say, the point of all of this is to reach a negotiated outcome, a commercial outcome. And that's what the code is designed to achieve.
Yeah. And, clearly, Senator, the platforms want to avoid the precedent along the lines of what Bridget's saying. If you value content in this market, and they pay for content in this market, it has knock-on effects. And, you can see that they would rather create separate products on the side than deal with that core issue of the value of content. And I think a previous speaker made the point that, initially the internet was going to be about the free interaction of content, but the way in which it emerged was that we had monopoly gatekeepers controlling that. And what this is about is really saying there is content that generates income for them that should be paid for, just as any commercial arrangement should be made between players in any other parts of the economy. Okay,
so that all makes sense to me, but it sounds like from your evidence that there haven't been detailed discussions about Showcase.
Not as far as I'm concerned, in terms of any serious negotiation, around that. Look, one thing is that the tech companies, because it's new, or it's not that new anymore. It's obviously over 20 years, but they create tech as a bit of a black box, and it's different from anything else, and it's different from the past economies. And of course, the rules are changed. But what we're talking about here is really just the application of fundamental economic rules that have been applied historically when you reach the point where monopoly operators distort the market. It's just really that clear. And I'm sure the oil companies said it was different, and certainly the telcos in the 70s said it was all different. And there were issues of scale that meant that they couldn't be broken up, but they were broken up effectively, and they were regulated effectively.
No, I'm sure that's right, but the internet, it was inferred this morning that there'd been discussions about Showcase domestically in detail. So I'll assume from my repeated questioning here that they haven't been in this case. Look, the other thing
not to our knowledge. Let's just
okay. Well, look, I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is Facebook. So, I mean, I asked them in detail about the value of news on their platform. As you know, Facebook are dealing with this issue of being the home of fake news. And so I would have thought that credible news from your members and from other news outlets would have been something that would bolster their credibility as a platform. But I mean, their view was, and I pressed their representatives on this, that there was no value, there was no commercial value at all to Facebook for having news shared on its platform. So what do you say to that?
Well, Facebook is a news platform. I mean, it deals with third-party generated information, first-party generated information. It distributes information. I mean, I think both of the platforms shy away from the reality that they're in effect publishers, which gives them responsibilities, which we're increasingly seeing, because once you start withdrawing content, as they've had to over recent times, you're actually taking responsibility for that content. So they've never really wanted to be responsible for the content because it has economic consequences and it has potentially regulatory consequences for them. But they're finding this very, very difficult to manage in the real world, where people see them as essentially not just distributors of content, but effectively publishers of content because of the material and the breadth of material that they do have.
Okay. Well, look, I just have one final question, and that is, I mean, as you know, there's been threats and there's been this form of blackmail around these hearings today, as there has been for some time. I mean, if some of these providers decided to leave Australia, what would that mean for your membership?
Well, I think it's a marketplace, and there's search engines that they're dominant search. Google's a dominant search engine, and Facebook is a dominant platform in its space. But there are other players, and other players would enter the market. And certainly there's opportunity. You know, the print panel made the point. Chris Jantz made the point that there will be the ability of people to go direct to websites to get news and information, and that may increase the direct traffic. But who's to know? I mean, it's the market will play out. If someone I'd find it, it would be a surprising choice for someone to withdraw from a market where they provided billions of dollars of revenue just because they are required to pay for content which they can readily afford.
Well, we're talking here about an $8 billion market, half of which goes to Google according to the ACCC. We're talking in the media realm here of 600 million. So, I mean, it would be bizarre if an organisation was to walk away from 4 billion in revenue. But if they did, I imagine that life would go on, wouldn't it?
Well, look, the one thing that, I mean, I think there's always been a question mark about traditional media companies and how adaptive they have been. the old versus new question. And I mean, the media companies are remarkably adept at managing change, be it, you know, print companies going to digital. Our members have massively changed their content mix to meet the realities, gone into new businesses, particularly around BVOD services, absolutely dealt with you know, traditional or legacy cost bases, really developed new platforms and new ways of thinking internally and the presentation of their content and the types of content. So if there's new opportunities that come into the market by the withdrawal of some of these players, well, you know, I think we're well placed to take advantage of them.
Well, and can I just add that whilst we like to think of Google and, well, may not like to, but we tend to think of Google and the internet as synonymous, should they make good on their threat, I guess we'd find out that they're not, that the internet does exist without Google, and people will still want to use the internet, and they will find ways of doing that, and people will fill that vacuum.
Very good. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I believe that's all the questions we have for you today. So you go with our thanks. I'll ask you to disconnect from the video conference. You can continue to observe the hearing via the live stream from the Parliament House website if you wish to. And we'll break moment.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to express our view.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll now move to representatives from the ABC and SBS. I can see SBS online. Have we got the ABC? We're still trying to get them. Well, what we might do, so we might just suspend briefly, just hopefully for 30 seconds or so while we get the ABC online. So we will suspend the hearing briefly. All right, we will resume the hearing. I welcome representatives from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and the Special Broadcasting Services Corporation. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. Information on procedural rules govern public hearings has been provided to witnesses and is available from the Secretariat. Witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphone to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Can you ensure that your microphones are set to mute if you're not speaking? Answers to questions on notice are required to be returned by close of business Monday 1 Feb. I will invite you to make a brief opening statement, but before we do that, I'll just go around the virtual room and just get everyone's name and the capacity in which you appear on the record. Mr Tapley, can we start with you?
Yes, Mark Tapley, Director of Strategy at the ABC. I'm joined by my colleagues, Carl Toohey, a Senior Strategist, as well as Mr Scott Gamble, the Manager of Social Media Strategy.
Thank you very much. And I'll go to the blue room in Sydney.
Good afternoon. My name is Mandy Wicks and I'm the Director of News and Current Affairs at SBS.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Yassine. I'm the Director of Corporate Strategy at SBS.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire O'Neill. I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs at SBS.
And my name is Natasha Reeves. I'm External Affairs Manager at SBS.
Great. Welcome all. As I said, I will invite you now to make some brief opening remarks. Mr Tapley, I think you volunteered to kick us off and then we'll go to SBS. Go ahead, Mr Tapley.
I did. Thank you, Chair. The ABC appreciates the opportunity to give evidence today on this important bill. In the final report of the Digital Platform Inquiry, the ACCC found there was a significant power imbalance between digital platforms and Australian news media businesses. It made a strong case for regulatory intervention to improve the bargaining position of news media businesses in order to support public interest journalism, which is so critical to the effective operation of our democracy. The government's legislative response to the inquiry has been developed after extensive consultation. The ABC welcomes the government's decision to include the ABC and SBS in the bargaining and arbitration arrangements on remuneration under the Code. Where digital platforms are deriving value from the use of ABC News content on their platforms, the ABC and taxpayers have a legitimate interest in ensuring that a portion of that value is reinvested into ABC journalism. The ABC has publicly committed to reinvesting any revenue derived from negotiations under the Code directly into its regional services. This is consistent with both the ABC's 5-year plan to invest more in services for regional Australia and also the underlying objective of the Code, which is to support public interest journalism. Public interest journalism is central to the ABC's purpose. The inclusion of the ABC in the remuneration arrangements under the Code has the potential to provide a major boost to coverage of regional Australia and also strengthen the ABC's emergency coverage. This is particularly important at a time when there has been a withdrawal of some local commercial media. The ABC, with 48 locations outside the capital cities, has the track record and capability to deliver the benefits flowing from the Code and ensure that revenue generated from taxpayer-funded journalism goes back into services for the community. The ABC supports the passage of the bill. In common with other media companies, however, there are areas where we believe the bill could be strengthened. These include user comment moderation tools, the recognition of original news content, and increased transparency around the data collected by digital platforms. This bill is a very important reform. We are strongly supportive of the provision to review its operation in 12 months to ensure that it is achieving its fundamental purpose, which is to promote public interest journalism. My colleagues and I would be very pleased to answer any questions you have on the ABC's views in relation to the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Tapley, and I will just note that Mr Gamble has joined us during your contribution. Now we'll go to SBS for some opening remarks. Ms Wicks, who's handling that?
I am Chair, Ms O'Neill, Director of Corporate Affairs, and thank you, Chair, and to the committee for the opportunity to appear today. SBS has a long legacy of providing trusted news and information to all Australians, and in particular ensuring that news and information is available to Australia's multicultural, Indigenous and multilingual communities. These services are more relevant now than ever before. For example, in the past year, SBS has and continues to play a critical role in reaching all Australians with vital public health information during the COVID-19 crisis through multi-platform services in English and more than 60 other languages. SBS supports a bargaining code to ensure that fair, impartial, balanced, accurate and trustworthy news and current affairs is readily accessible to and shareable by all Australians by being well represented on digital platforms. Digital platforms are an important way for SBS to reach audiences and provide them with access to news and current affairs in the public interest. However, the digital platforms also control what content is seen by Australian audiences, which is why this legislation is so important.
In 9 minutes.
And bear in mind that for the ABC and SBS, this is news content that Australian taxpayers have already paid for. So those Australians should not be hindered from being able to find and access that content on the digital platforms. As well as recognising the valuable role of public broadcasters in contributing to public interest journalism in Australia, the ACCC, through its digital platforms inquiry, found that bargaining power between the platform operators and the news media organisations must be appropriately balanced so news providers are adequately compensated for their content and have access to the information needed to best serve their audiences, the Australian public. While SBS supports the introduction and passage of the bill, there are a number of important issues which should be considered or amended prior to its passing. These include the introduction of a provision for the digital platforms to provide enhanced moderation tools for managing user comments on their services. This is critical for legal, resourcing and audience reasons. The notification period for changes to algorithms and, importantly, related policies should be increased from 14 days to provide news media businesses with sufficient time to build and adapt accordingly. Strengthening of clauses regarding non-differentiation to mitigate potential unintended consequences and ensure an expansive application. Each of those amendments will support SBS's interaction with the digital platforms and how our content is shared with audiences. Policy decisions made by the digital platforms are what truly guide the presentation of content on these services. These policy decisions should be transparent and work in the public interest, and most importantly, be executed on fair terms. To ensure that our audiences can find us, news businesses, including SBS, are willing participants in these ecosystems. This means we must invest, in some cases a great deal of resource, in ensuring that our products meet the specified requirements of those digital platforms, only to have that investment devalued when those requirements are changed without appropriate or sometimes any notice. The public interest is at the core of this code, and as other submitters have flagged, we agree that this should be included as a specific factor for the arbitration panel to consider in making judgments on remuneration. Should this legislation be passed, we look forward to continuing to work collaboratively with the digital platforms and cooperating with them in good faith to implement this code. Thank you, Committee and Chair, and we welcome your questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those opening statements. We'll go straight to the Deputy Chair, Senator Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair. Just to the ABC, I mean, given your sort of preeminent position in regional Australia with, drought, fire, flood, cyclone, and the production of news in respect to all of that, how do you see this? You've said that you want to see the algorithms used by Google and Facebook give significant weight to original journalistic content and prioritise it over rewrites of the same content. I mean, given that I don't think anybody can see the algorithms at all at the moment, how do you think that's going to work?
There is a provision, thank you, Senator, there is a provision in the bill that requires the platforms to consult with media businesses on how their algorithm will promote original news content. So that is a provision in the bill at the moment that we're supportive of. It does at the moment say that they should do that on a one-off basis. We feel that they should, we'd prefer the language that was in the exposure draft of the bill, which would require digital platforms to do that every 12 months. But at the moment, the legislation requires them to do that at least once after the legislation passes.
So the bill will provide for a mechanism for you to see an algorithm and ensure that your news service is not being discriminated against, basically.
No, I don't believe it will require us to see an algorithm, but they must consult with us in terms of how they're going to go about promoting original news content. I believe there is also a role for the ACMA in relation to ensuring that consultation process works effectively.
Okay, so is there any unintended consequences that you can see coming out of this legislation with a mandatory code?
Senator, our concerns would be more around things that are not in the bill or clarifications to the bill. A major concern is the fact that the bill no longer includes provisions to give us tools to moderate user comments. I believe my colleague at SBS mentioned that as well, and I know Free TV have. The inability of us to effectively moderate user comments on Facebook does expose us to legal risk, and there's also occupational health and safety issues for us there. We also have concerns around the data provisions that are in the bill. At the moment, the platforms would only be required to share a list of data that they collect if they did provide data to another news media business. So there's a strong incentive for them not to share any data at all, and therefore avoid the application of the provision.
But overall, you believe the code is a good thing and that it will be successful?
Yes, we support the bill, and we also think that the provision there to review it after 12 months is helpful, because it enables the Parliament to ensure that the bill is achieving its intended purpose.
And to SBS, the same question. You obviously support the bill, and Is there a view that it's going to be a success, or are you more work in progress?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Look, we are of the same mind as the ABC in this regard. I think the review process is an excellent mechanism to ensure that the bill is not creating any unintended consequences and that it's operating as it should.
And you've said that you don't believe the 14-day notice period for algorithm changes will be sufficient for news media business to take necessary action to respond to changes. Can you explain or give further and better particulars about that?
Yes, thank you. The challenge with these algorithm changes is that they are often a result of a policy change made by a third-party platform. And these policies do have an impact on us as a broadcaster and as a news publisher. Often these changes require an overhead, whether it be a technical overhead, a management overhead, or a creation of new work within our businesses. To be able to deliver on that new work within 14 days is very difficult. As you can imagine, the technology and the ecosystems that we operate in are highly complex. And with this complexity, it is very difficult to be able to determine within 2 weeks whether or not a change is something that you can fulfil. So we would suggest that 28 days is more appropriate because it allows our people to be able to build the requirements to the platform, test those requirements and push them out to the public in the public interest.
Okay, and finally to both ABC and SBS, what impact would this have on your revenue, the bill, the mandatory code? Would it be negligible, substantial, unquantifiable?
Senator, I think we're in the same position as earlier witnesses before this committee in that it's very difficult to determine what sort of revenue would flow under the code. The code provisions itself are not settled yet, but I think it was the witness from The Guardian earlier that made the point that the bill will facilitate the exchange of information, which is really quite critical to us getting an assessment of what the value should be. So it's just too early for us to make a determination of what it will be.
And similarly for SBS, we would be the same. It's only preliminary stages for us to consider how we would value it, but it goes without saying that whatever revenues would come through would go into fulfilling our charter, which, as Ms O'Neill mentioned, is really about delivering services to multicultural and multilingual and Indigenous communities in Australia. And this is content that is often not seen, heard on any other by any other publisher except for SBS. So it's really vital in our minds that these stories continue to be published on those platforms. Any
revenue would go towards public interest journalism and presumably the employment of journalists. Is that true for both organisations?
Absolutely, and that's it. And as I say, we're often providing public interest journalism or stories that are not otherwise heard by any, on any other platform or from any other publisher.
That's true for us as well, Senator. We're very keen to invest more in the creation of more positions for regional journalists.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Chair. If I could start with the ABC, following on from Minister Fletcher's comments that any additional funding that would flow from this legislation would go to regional aid, well, as confirmed by the ABC, would go to regional journalism. I wanted to ask you, and again on your submission on page 2, you talked about any additional revenue accruing to the ABC under the code would be directed to fund new investment in public interest journalism at the local and regional level. I'd just like you to define local and regional for me, please.
We did clarify in a letter that we sent to Minister Fletcher that when we say regional, we mean outside of the capital cities.
And local?
Local is a broader term that we use at the ABC. Local would also cover, metropolitan Melbourne, metropolitan areas of the capital cities. But we've clarified in our letter to Minister Fletcher that our commitment is that it will go into regional journalism.
terrific. So when I've spoken previously to the ABC, the proportion of journalists and activities that are based regionally is significantly lower than what it is in the cities. So can I just confirm that funding would also extend not just to journalist bodies, but photographic support, administration support? ABC regional journalists tell me frequently that they have a broader range of tasks and requirements than their city-based cousins.
Yes, Senator, we have, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we operate from 48 locations around regional Australia. We have 550 content makers operating in regional Australia. Depending on the amount of revenue that flowed under the code, we would certainly be looking to enhance the infrastructure that supports that journalism as well. I hear the point you're making, and we certainly would be looking to not only invest in journalism, but the tools that help that journalism be made.
550 journalists in regional Australia out of...
Content makers.
Content makers.
Yes.
Out of how many across Australia?
I believe our headcount is in the vicinity of, total headcount is in the vicinity of 4,000. They're not all content makers. I'd have to come back to you on notice on that, Senator.
Right, okay. So you're saying that the money any additional funds would be used exclusively in the regions rather than competing in the bigger media markets that are already amply served with public interest journalism?
That is the commitment that we have made in writing, and I'm reaffirming today, Senator.
All right, that's terrific. I also want to ask you about regional journalism in the form of regional newspapers that have been under so much pressure recently. How do you see the impact of free content broadcasting by the ABC, either news, either TV or printed, digital? How do you see that competing in that market? And how do you see the code adequately allowing other regional journalism to thrive?
Well, Senator, we have always had a mixed media market in Australia, with the ABC competing alongside private operators. The ABC does support a healthy media ecosystem. We think that's valuable for the community. We are hopeful that under the code there will be benefits for those regional publishers. The evidence that we have seen from work we've commissioned is that people are consuming, particularly on digital, they are not consuming only one media source, that they often migrate. They might look at the ABC and then a local media source as well. So we certainly think there's room in the Australian media ecosystem for a number of players, and we're hopeful that the bill will assist the smaller regional players and improve their economic viability as well.
Okay, well, I would encourage you to continue supporting that diverse regional ecosystem, please, as you continue these conversations. I wonder finally, as part of this, if you would consider moving more journalists or content makers out of Sydney and Melbourne, given the very small proportion that are based regionally, 500 out of 8,000. And could you also describe to me what a content maker is?
Senator, we have in our 5-year plan that was launched last year, we did emphasise that we are looking to get more local. We've got a public commitment that we want to get 75% of our content makers outside of the Ultimo building in Sydney, and we are working towards that under the 5-year plan. In terms of the definition of...
Could I just clarify on that? That's not just moving people from Ultimo to Western Sydney. That is genuinely out of the capital cities.
We're still exploring how we would go about meeting that target. It may well be that we have a larger presence in Western Sydney. We do have an office in Parramatta at the moment, but we may look to put more people in Western Sydney. We're also looking more broadly about how we could meet that decentralisation objective in other areas of the country. In terms of the
Content
definition of content maker, there is quite a long definition, Senator. I will provide that to you on notice very quickly after the conclusion of this hearing.
Terrific. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my questions.
Senator Patrick, did you have questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll just direct this at the ABC at this point. I presume because of your late inclusion, you have had no negotiations with Google to date?
We have had no negotiations in relation to the proposed designated platforms of Google Search or Facebook Newsfeed.
Yep, okay. Can you just describe to me how you think the ABC, or whether or not the ABC views News Corp, Channel 9 and so forth, The Guardian as competitors? Obviously the public broadcaster, but how do you view yourself in the market?
Senator, obviously at some level we all compete for audience attention. The ABC's role, though, is specified under the Act of Parliament. We have a charter where we have a very specific role to perform for the Australian people. So I think we're different, but at some level, of course, we want to attract eyeballs and audience attention for our content. But I think if you look across the submissions that have been made to this committee from Free TV, the publishers, SBS, there's a lot of commonality in the way we see this particular issue.
Sure. One of the things, the only reservation I have about the ABC entering into an agreement, and indeed I'll pose the same question to the SBS, is that in the negotiations, and I accept you haven't been involved in any to date, may drive you down a path where somehow the payment is commensurate to the attractiveness of your content. Where I'm getting to is, does this in some way cause a pollution of your rather purist look at the world at the moment to perhaps potentially getting to a point where you are engaging in clickbait yourself because there's a financial return? I just want to understand how you will enter the negotiations to prevent, with a view to preventing that sort of effect occurring.
So, Senator, ABC Commercial operates within the ABC as a separate business unit. It has no role in making any decisions around the commissioning of content. For example, in the news space, all decisions around what news content is commissioned are made separately by the news division, and then afterwards, ABC Commercial is involved in distributing that content. More than 95% of our revenue comes from the Commonwealth appropriation, and we do have procedures in place to ensure that there's that independence that we have is protected. And we have been licensing some of our content in the news space, I think, for the last 17 years. So those protections have held up, and we're confident that they would hold up in any scenario under the code as well.
So I'll direct the same question at SBS, obviously a slightly different model, but just the concern that you might engage in a different approach to journalism, or have a different flavour that tries to draw content on, or tries to draw an audience on the basis that you have an agreement with Google and Facebook, based on volume or some sort of arrangement like that.
Yes, I'll take this one. There's been sort of no talk at the moment of any kind of arrangement based on sort of clicks, I guess. But, SBS is, as you alluded to, is not fully funded by government. So current operations and service levels, we really depend on the additional revenue sources. From a content perspective, I think what I would say is what's interesting to us is that it is often our original content that does the best in digital platforms, because it is often different to what else is out there. So, you know, a particular story or profile on a community or some important information is what will end up going viral, if you want to use that term, in those digital platforms. So we don't feel there would be a risk or any concern around that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Just briefly, I just wanted to ask, I know we're kind of running out of time here. If ABC and SBS were not subject to this code, would you be concerned that Australian taxpayers funding content that's created by your journalists, your staff, your organisations, and yet a multinational corporation gets to make profit off it?
Senator, we would be concerned about that. That was one of the reasons we argued for the ABC to be included into the remuneration provisions in the code. It did seem to us to be anomalous to allow these massive digital platforms to build their business off the back of, in part, content that's funded by taxpayers.
So if we're all in this on this page of saying we want a free and fair access to information and credible news, then having the public broadcasters included is important to ensuring that that it is indeed fair.
I would agree with that. And I think some of the other media companies, if you look at their submissions during this process, they have recognised that as well. And in fact, that the code will operate more effectively if the public broadcasters are included rather than excluded.
Overall, we've had a bit of, we've had discussion today about, whether this is a market failure, the current situation. Clearly that's, all evidence is pointing in that direction. But what does this mean for public interest journalism, right? I guess I'm concerned that often a lot of the discussion about this code and the impact that it has, particularly on the commercial operations, is purely about what's good for, Google's business model, Facebook's business model, News Limited's business model, or Channel 9 business model. But ultimately, at the end of the day, surely this is about public interest journalism. And isn't that in and of itself, in the public interest, a public good, and so therefore needs to be paid for, needs to be supported, needs to be regulated?
Senator, that was certainly my takeaway from the ACCC's Digital Platforms Inquiry report. They made the case for regulatory intervention because public interest journalism is not just an ordinary product, that it is actually sort of the lifeblood of how our democratic system works. So yes, I do think that's the overarching policy objective of this bill, is to support public interest journalism. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, that's why that review in 12 months is really critical to ensure that it's delivering on that purpose.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Patrick, yes?
I just wanted to ask both the ABC and the SBS, noting that Google have raised the prospect of exiting the market if this legislation were to go through, how would that affect the ABC in terms of its the logistics of delivering its services to Australians? Are you in a position, are you prepared for that if that were to occur?
Senator, there's no doubt that these platforms are important for the ABC, and I'm sure for SBS as well, in terms of reaching audiences. As they indicated this morning, there are 19 million Australians on these platforms every month. They are an important way for us to find audiences that don't come directly to our services. So there would be a significant impact. over time, it may well be that audiences will migrate to go back to the established brands that they know. So they may come directly to the ABC and to SBS and the high profile news brands. But there's no doubt in the short term that it would be very disruptive. We have at this stage not in any sort of war game about what that would mean. I would say, however, that it is a priority for us to continue to invest in our own digital products to make them as good as possible and to try and encourage audiences to come directly to us if at all possible.
And SBS, thank you.
From an SBS perspective, similarly, Facebook and Google provide important ways to reach our audiences, there's no doubt. There are other aggregators in the market who are also helping to serve that purpose as well. Our intention, of course, is to have positive conversations to reach an agreement within the code, but we also feel that if this came about, of course, we would expect a huge increase in direct traffic to our own platforms and products as a result as well. And just going back to the previous question about public interest journalism, I just wanted to add that, as Ms O'Neill mentioned earlier, Australians have paid for our content, and as such, we feel that they have a right to see that content on the platforms where, like it or not, they do spend a lot of time. And there was a lot of talk today about misinformation on those platforms, and I think the ABC and SBS and certainly many of the other publishers, we provide the balance in those platforms.
Right, just checking, Senator Bragg, you didn't indicate you had any questions. Did you wish to ask any questions?
No, thanks.
Great, thank you very much. In that case, I thank both sets of witnesses for their participation today. I'll ask you to disconnect from the video conference. You can continue to observe the hearing should you wish to do so through the live stream from the Parliament website. We will now suspend briefly, let's say just for 5 minutes, and then we will come back with the ACCC. We'll resume this hearing, and I welcome representatives from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. Information on procedural rules and governing public hearings has been provided to witnesses and is available from the Secretariat. Witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Please be advised that answers to questions on notice should be sent to the Secretariat by close of business Monday, 1st of February 2021. For the record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear?
Rod Sims, Chair of the ACCC. And Kate?
Kate Reader, one of the Joint General Managers of the Digital Platforms Branch at the ACCC.
Excellent, and welcome again to you both. Mr Sims, you have an opening statement, I believe.
Yes, I'll read it as briefly as I can, or go through it briefly as I can. Thanks, Senator.
Excellent, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation to appear today. We really appreciate it. The central point is that the Code's purpose is to address a clear and significant bargaining imbalance that exists between Google and Facebook on the one hand and the news media businesses. This is the essence of the Code. It evens up the bargaining positions so that fair commercial deals can be made. Without the Code as a backup, that power imbalance will remain. There will not be commercial deals, and instead the platforms will be free to continue to offer terms on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. While there may be other examples of bargaining power imbalances, we recognise news and journalism as a special category because they perform a critical role in a democratic society. The Code is a specific solution to a specific problem. This is also why the Code includes the crucial provision for collective bargaining by news media businesses. Contrary to some views, this provision improves competition by assisting smaller news media businesses, including regional and community media, to bargain for fair deals under the Code. Now, I can appreciate why Google and Facebook, as commercial businesses, do not want to pay for content that they're currently able to distribute, display, and benefit from without payment. but that is why a mandatory code is needed. I'd like to emphasise that the code before Parliament is significantly different to the draft we released last July. This code specifically addresses the three main concerns, for example, that Google raised with the draft code, and we've also taken into account a lot of feedback from Facebook. For example, as well as the value the platforms get from news, an arbiter must now take into account the value that news media businesses get from traffic that comes from the platforms. In other words, there is now recognition of the two-way value exchange, which was such a key issue. There's been other changes as well, including changes to remove YouTube and Discover Showcase and Instagram and Facebook News tab from the code in response to their concerns. The point I'm making is that critical issues raised by the platforms about the draft code, we think, have been essentially addressed. And of course, now we've got some further issues. Now, Google is a very successful company that has set up its search business according to its own interests, as you'd expect. It has substantially changed its search product over time. It's introduced paid search ads as a way to monetize its services. It changed the way search results are displayed. The top results are now often ads rather than organic links with the most relevant results. It's also added a carousel of relevant news articles at the top of its page for some results. It has one-box results, and it has introduced new formats for publishing web pages. My point is that search is no longer the simple 10 blue links that we may remember some time ago. And it's clear from these examples and from Google's recent experiment on Australian consumers that it has the ability to change its search service as it sees fit. I do not accept the argument that the code will break search or destroy a free and open internet any more than paid search ads destroyed search. Importantly also, the code does not require Google and Facebook to pay for linking news content. Indeed, discussions we've been aware of have focused on paying upfront lump sum amounts, not per click, and that's a key point. Further, they can negotiate and make offers on other terms, including on products like Google Showcase or Facebook News tab outside the code or under the code. What the code does require is the digital platforms to negotiate in good faith over paying news businesses for the value that the digital platforms derive from having news content on their platforms, and participate in arbitration if no agreement is reached. The vital point is that it is this requirement that evens up the bargaining power and so allows commercial deals to be made. Without the code as a backup, commercial deals cannot be made, in our view, and we're simply left with take it or leave it offers. Google, of course, already does pay for content. According to its own blog, Google pays music publishers for the right to display lyrics for results displayed in response to search queries. Now, the committee may wish to ask Google for any other examples of payments for content on search. While we're pleased that Google has developed a Showcase product, it is clear that Showcase likely only exists due to the threat of regulation. We've seen this pattern in countries like France and the UK, where Google announces initiatives only after the threat of regulation becomes sufficiently serious. And in the end, and this is important, the decision about what Showcase will look like, how it will operate, and whether it offers a news business a Showcase deal is all entirely up to Google. This is why the Showcase product does not address the imbalance in bargaining power that the code is designed to remedy. I'm very happy now to take your questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Just a couple of opening ones from me. Why was the decision taken to move from a voluntary to a mandatory code?
We were asked by the government, I think in April, to assess whether a voluntary code was going to be successful. We looked at what was happening in relation to discussions between news media businesses and Google and news media businesses and Facebook. We looked at what they were saying and doing, and the government asked us in April, we formed the view that, in our view, a voluntary code wasn't going to achieve the objectives the government was seeking to achieve, and that therefore a mandatory code was required to meet those objectives.
So you formed the view that there was no prospect of deals under the voluntary arrangements?
The voluntary arrangements were, in our view, completely in the hands of Google and Facebook. They were going to be deals very much on their terms. There were going to be some form of offers, but they were going to be very much take it or leave it offers that weren't going to meet the government's needs and weren't going to meet the need we saw for commercial bargains where you've got equal bargaining positions, equal bargaining power.
Thank you. We'll go to the Deputy Chair, Senator Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair. Both Google and Facebook submit that this code isn't workable. I mean, after such a lengthy period of negotiation and, you know, right up to the formulation of legislation, how do you characterise that position that they're advancing to this committee today?
I think that this is a code they don't want. Google and Facebook like to do things on their terms. I think the code does what it's intended to do. It is workable. It allows for a process of negotiation, and I have every belief that both parties, news media businesses and platforms, will want to do commercial deals, and then you've got arbitration there, which is what really gives strength to the bargaining position of the news media businesses. So I think it's workable. We've seen these sort of things work in the past where you've got negotiate, arbitrate regimes. So I think this is just something Google and Facebook don't want.
Okay. Now, the uncertainty over the negotiation of the voluntary code, mandatory code, the changes as you've highlighted of the operation of the code during the negotiations, what impact has that had on revenue that media outlets may well have sought or achieved?
I think negligible, Senator. There were some offers made. I've spoken to, and deals done, as Google and Facebook said. I've spoken to, I think, most of the media businesses that were on the receiving end of those deals. And I'm paraphrasing here and collecting their comments as a job lot. But in essence, they were saying, well, look, they're offering us a bit of money. We'll take the bit of money, but really we want the code so we can do a proper commercial deal. So I think the amounts were fairly small, with the exception of ACM. They were with very small outlets. And my sense was people were, as it were, picking up the money off the pavement, but really waiting for the code so they could do a proper commercial deal. So I don't really think it's had much effect in delaying the sort of payments that one would expect to come under the code.
And what is your view of the raising of the US Free Trade Agreement as an issue throughout this code? Is that part of your remit?
No, it's not, Senator. That's something we've very happily left to Treasury, so I think very much a question for them.
Okay. So are you satisfied the code as promulgated by yourselves will have improved commercial negotiations and revenue outcomes for Australian media businesses? And if you're confident of that, do you know how much it would, is it a small margin, a great margin, or is there a mysterious algorithm out there somewhere that would tell us what it is?
Very good question, Senator. Look, I am confident that this will allow proper commercial deals to be done. You know, you can only have a commercial deal where you've got reasonably even bargaining power. You can't do a commercial deal with a monopoly unless you've got something on your side that can help the bargaining process. Now, What this code does is it gives the possibility of arbitration, which I suspect won't be used that often, but that possibility evens up the bargaining process. And so this is really the only way we can get commercial deals. Look, my sense, Senator, is that the commercial deals will be substantive. If you think about, for example, the cost of journalism, obviously it won't cover just 2 or 3% of the cost of journalism, nor will it cover 50 or 60% of the cost of journalism, but I think it'll be something that's substantive and meaningful, and therefore will make a significant contribution to journalism in Australia, which, as we all know, is so fundamental to the future of Australia.
So you think it'll underpin the employment of journalists and perhaps improve the number of employed journalists?
Yes, I do. I think it'll both stem some of the problems and allow extra journalists to be employed. And I think that will be, I know the question was asked earlier, how much? I don't know the answer to that, but, it's not trivial. I think it'll be a significant increase in journalism compared to the alternative with this code, and therefore with more journalism we'll get more diversity in media, which is good, and we'll get more coverage of more things, which just can only help Australian society. And
what are the key potential risks or unintended consequences? Do you think it's realistic to think that Google or Facebook may vacate the space?
Senator, I honestly do not know what they're going to do. But I think the important point I would make is that this code is something both Google and Facebook do not want. They don't like the idea of arbitration. They want to do, they talk of commercial deals where they're in full control of the deal. In my view, that's not a commercial deal. So given this is a code that they don't want, I think it's understandable that they're going to be saying a range of things to prevent the code coming into force. There was never going to be, I think, a code where they said, oh, this is terrific, we're really happy with this. That was just never going to happen. So I think where we are was not unexpected in the sense that they have many concerns with it. I think that's what you'd expect them to say. Quite what they would do, Senator, though, I don't know. So I'm not surprised with their current position, but what they'll actually do when and if the code becomes law, I honestly don't know.
And they both suggested amendments to the code in their appearances here today. Given that this is a government committee and presumably the government will get its way on this code, what happens then? Do you think they're placing, a bit of store in amendments that no one's going to move?
Oh, look, I think, Senator, I remember earlier on in the discussions today, there was talk about why has this taken so long to get to where it's got to, and I think that's been because we have done an enormous, both we and very importantly Treasury, Department of Communications and the government have just done an enormous amount of listening and analysis of the positions put. As I say, Google early on, when we put out the July draft, came up with 3 problems they had. They put out a blog immediately. All 3 of those problems have been addressed that they come up with then. It takes time to work those things through. There are a lot of non-remuneration issues. Most of those have been substantively changed and they are complex issues. So it has taken time. There's been a lot of listening. If there's sensible changes to be made, there can be further listening, but this is the end of a very long process where we've really listened a lot to what Google and Facebook have to say. So I think, if I heard Facebook correctly, they just don't like arbitration. Well, you can't even up the balance, the bargaining. And that's been a consistent Facebook position. Well, if you don't have arbitration, you don't have any evening up of the bargaining power. You can't have commercial deals without the arbitration. So I think that's, if they don't want arbitration, I just don't see how you can accommodate that Google's position that it wants this to be all about Showcase. Well, they define what Showcase is. They define how it works. Therefore, they define the value. Therefore, they're in control. So, look, I think if there's suggestions that can help this be a better code, that's fine. But suggestions that make the code unworkable are not fine.
And given your, clearly you must assess what happens around the world, and I think overnight Google signed a deal with the French publishers. Is it just business as normal? Is this how these negotiations are characterised? I mean, is there a bit of brinkmanship here and right to the end, and then, you know, someone's going to say, okay, well, we'll cut a deal along this line? Is that how it always works?
I started my career doing commercial negotiations a very, very, very long time ago, Senator. And I think in just about every commercial deal we cut, there was brinkmanship. I remember sitting opposite an aluminium company and we staged a walkout in the negotiation, which meant the whole deal was off, forget it, we're out of here. So there's always brinkmanship in serious negotiations. So look, but I don't know, as I say, Senator, exactly what they're going to do here. As I say, I'm not surprised at we are where we are. We'll just have to see what they do. But as I say, if there's sensible suggestions, then they can be taken on board.
And finally, for me, is the ACCC satisfied that the benefits from the proposed code outweigh any potential untoward outcomes?
Yes, we are, Senator. There's been a lot of changes to the code, which I think deal with either things we hadn't thought through properly the first time or perceptions of problems. We don't think there's problems, but we can solve them to remove them for the avoidance of doubt. So I think we think where we are now, we've got a workable code that can achieve the objective that I think we all want to achieve.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair, and great to see you, Mr Sims. I feel very confident in you working your way through this process, given the amount of experience that the ACCC has with codes of various flavours. But I just wonder if you wouldn't mind, for the purposes of the record, just describe a little further this idea of a failed marketplace in the journalistic environment and its impact for Australia.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Good question. So there's clearly a market failure here because you've got companies that the media platforms must engage with. They can't not engage with Google. They can't not engage with Facebook. The platforms need media as a whole. Media as a whole generates benefits, significant benefits for the platforms, but any particular individual media company does not. I mean, they can get their media through a whole range of Australian news, through a whole range of sources. So any individual company doesn't have bargaining power if left on its own. But the media as a whole is tremendously valuable. So the market failure is that bargaining imbalance that any individual media company has. Because of that market failure, it's not possible to strike commercial deals that will be the sort of deals you'd expect in a competitive marketplace. For example, if there were many Googles, many Facebooks, as distinct from the tremendous market power both of them have at the moment, because you can't strike those good commercial deals, then the media is not getting sufficient reward for its content. Therefore, we have less media in Australia than we otherwise would, and I think that just damages our society and our democracy. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And just a little further to that, one of the issues that's been discussed is the advertising marketplace, and whilst the media companies are not specifically receiving advertising or advertising to appear with Google and Facebook, the impact on the smaller players or on the retail and other players by paying marketing dollars or advertising dollars to Google and Facebook has reduced the advertising available to those traditional media platforms. When the ACCC looked at that, what proportion of the advertising market did you feel that those two, Google and Facebook, end up having? We've just heard some different numbers. Google said 20%. Did you end up being able to land a number?
Look, I did, and Kate might want to add to this, but our numbers are pretty much what you heard from the media companies this morning, that Google and Facebook have about 81% of the digital advertising market, and everybody else has the remaining 19%. I think when you were hearing lower numbers than that, you were defining a market that, and I'm not sure about this, but it might include billboards and other forms of advertising. So what we find in the competition world is that the key thing is defining the market. And if we often have mergers where there's two food companies wanting to get together who both make biscuits, and their view of the market is it's everything you can eat. So of course they're minnows in the market for everything you can eat. It just so happens that they're the two biggest biscuit manufacturers. So that market definition is fundamental.
Terrific. Thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate your report. I thought it was very comprehensive. So, Chair, I won't have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Patrick.
Thank you. Comprehensive and voluminous. I think that's quite a large report. Thank you for appearing. I just wanted to touch on a couple of topics, following on from Senator Gallagher on the issue of Facebook leaving the market. I imagine in your role, Mr. Sims, you would talk to your international counterparts. So I'm just wondering, just in trying to understand the reality of the proposition that's been put forward by Google, is there a movement on internationally to do similar sorts of things to what we are doing here in Australia, noting I'm presuming the market imbalance exists pretty much everywhere?
The market imbalance does exist everywhere. I think a couple of things to say about that. The model that we've got here is to address a bargaining imbalance, and Australia has sort of standard ways of dealing with this. I mean, negotiate, arbitrate when you've got a number of players negotiating with a monopoly is not unusual. Having collective bargaining with a monopoly is not unusual. So this is very much an Australian approach to the problem, but it's one based around bargaining and the imbalance in bargaining power. I think other countries are interested in this approach, but they may well go about them in their own ways. And certainly there's a lot of countries that recognise the issues in relation to journalism, that recognise the importance of journalism, that are looking at doing something. Whether they follow what we're doing or not, I don't know. The most perhaps advanced other regime is in Europe, where you've got a copyright regime that was mentioned earlier today, and deals have been done in France in relation to that. And those deals were done under a copyright law that definitely covered search. So there's no doubt the law under which those deals were done involves search. In the end, they did commercial deals that I think largely involved Showcase, but it was with a law pursuant to search. So it's similar to what we're doing here, but we think a negotiate arbitrate framework is much better than trying to do it under copyright. I certainly know there's mixed views in France about the value of those deals that have been done. Some are happy, some are not. But nonetheless, the deals in France are definitely a step forward.
Yeah, so in some sense, I'm trying to establish whether Google, who I presume know the rest of the market, really would be cutting their nose off in spite of their face, because whatever happens here is likely to happen in the next jurisdiction, perhaps irrespective of what we do, and then the next jurisdiction and the next jurisdiction, and the response can't be in each and every one of those to remove themselves from the market.
Look, that's another assessment Google are going to have to make, Senator, about what the impact of this is if they do follow through on the threats that we heard this morning.
Respectfully, I wasn't looking at this from a Google perspective. I was trying to tap into your knowledge to understand and inform us in some sense as to the brinkmanships that's being played. I just, after you informing the committee as to the dangers for Google, if they're real or not.
All I can say, Senator, is that certainly we're aware of, I mean, we are, through our digital platform unit, through Kate's unit, we're engaged with a lot of other countries, both their competition regulators, but also their media regulators, and there is a lot of discussion going on about doing something to even up the bargaining balance, doing something to get appropriate commercial arrangements between the platforms and the news media businesses. They're not as well advanced, so Google would have to make a judgment about whether, if they followed through on what they're saying here, they then confront the same problem elsewhere. And as you quite rightly say, whereas you could close down your operations in one country, you can't do it in 3 or 4 countries. So it certainly, I just don't know. I mean, we're a little ahead of other countries. I just don't know where those other countries are going to go. But I do know they're very, very interested, and they totally understand the problem. They totally understand the problem in the US, Canada, the UK, Europe. So I think there's a broad understanding of a problem that needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you. I'll move sideways now. In terms of negotiation and arbitration, I was discussing with Facebook their current arrangements in terms of boosting posts here in Australia, in that, you know, someone in Port Lincoln spends $1,000 trying to boost their ad in amongst the Port Lincoln community. That money actually goes to Ireland, and in fact there's no visibility, as far as I'm aware, as to the total revenue that Facebook makes here in Australia, because it wouldn't be reported through the Australian entity. How do you negotiate in circumstances where value is an important component, but there's complete opaqueness in respect of that value from these very large players? Is the arbitration mechanism in a position to force access to that sort of information such that a proper negotiation can be had?
Yes, Senator. So final offer arbitration, we think, is very well suited to what's going on here. So to answer your first question, or that last point, there is provision to get information through the arbitration process. The arbitrator will be in control of that, but that information will be made available. Then you've got the fact that this is final offer arbitration. The value of final offer arbitration is probably threefold. Firstly, it stops ambit claims, because if you had normal arbitration, Google and Facebook would say 0 or you pay us. The media companies would come up with something very large. This removes the ambit claims. Secondly, you can arbitrate over individual deals, and so, you know, it's not a sort of bespoke commercial arbitration. It allows final offers that suit each party, and so they're more tuned. And thirdly, you don't need as much information through final offer arbitration. I mean, if you're doing what may be termed a standard arbitration where both parties providing stuff to the arbitrator, it's the one who's got the most information that wins. I mean, you can flood the arbitrator with massive amounts of information. there is going to be inevitably an information difference between the two sides. Google and Facebook are always going to have massively more information. That's why they like standard arbitration, so they can leverage that. Final offer arbitration, I mean, there's still a disadvantage, but it's not as large.
And that's my point, is that the final offer made by the media companies is just ill-informed in some respects. They don't have the ability to get access to the right information because of the tax and the way in which each company structures their business to avoid tax.
Well,
did the ACCC get accurate information on the revenue here in Australia of Facebook, noting what I said about Ireland? I'm not asking you what it is, but did you, in your investigation, manage to understand what the total revenue was for Facebook?
I beg your pardon?
Did the ACCC in its inquiry, with your tremendous powers, were you able to establish how much the Irish company was generating in terms of income from the Australian market? Because if the ACCC can't do that, there's no way Channel 10 can, or the Guardian can, or anyone.
Oh, look, we went.
Chair, I might step in there if you.
Yeah, please.
Rod. In the DPI report, we did publish 2018 revenue figures. These were local figures from Australian revenue, and Google's was 3.7 billion and Facebook's was 1.7 billion.
I just want to be clear, did that include the money that is paid directly to the Irish entity when you boost an ad on Facebook locally?
That included the revenue generated from Australian businesses, so which is the way that we asked the question.
Okay, again, I just want to be clear about this. Does it include the revenue booked in Ireland in respect of those Facebook boosts?
And I understand the point you're trying to make, Senator, but the way we asked the question was we asked about revenue generated in Australia. So whether it was booked in Ireland or not, I couldn't tell you the answer, but we asked about whether the revenue was generated in Australia, and those were the figures that we were given.
Okay, so you think it does, whilst it wasn't broken down, you think it did include the revenue that went offshore?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
It certainly should have included that, Senator.
Okay.
By the way we asked the question.
All right, thank you.
We didn't forensically go through we can't trace things through various countries.
But again, you can see the difficulty that the Guardian or the other companies would have in making a final offer. They're really stabbing in the dark in some respects because they don't know the other side of the equation.
Well, Senator, I'd say a couple of things about that. So there's three factors that have to be taken into account with the arbitration. One is the value that is created from the news media business to the platforms and vice versa. That's one. Secondly is the cost of journalism, taking account of the cost of journalism, and the media businesses absolutely know that, and they absolutely know it's not going to be zero and it's not going to be 50%, so they can get your hands around it a bit there. And thirdly, and this is really important for a point that was made earlier today a number of times, the arbitrator has to take account of the fact that there can't be an undue burden on the platforms, which I think deals with a lot of the issues that the platforms raised this morning. It's specifically in there that there can't be an undue burden. Now, you might ask, if the money's going all over the place, how do you know? Well, what you can easily do is to say, well, what are their worldwide revenues? What are their worldwide profits? What's their profit share of revenue? If we know their revenue, apply the same profit share. You can get, I guess, Senator, my point is you can approximate
you can get order of magnitude.
Ways. Yeah, that's right. So that's again why final offer arbitration plays you in the game. If it's arbitration where you've got to nail everything down, then only one side's going to win that game. Sure. So final offer arbitration is fundamental. But I think the media companies will have enough information to make a reasonable offer. Just
my final line of questioning, and this goes to algorithm audits, which I put something out on this morning. I'm drafting some amendments to the bill. Firstly, are you aware of the activities carried out by Google over the last couple of weeks in terms of blocking out search results for particular media entities? And do you have a comment in relation to that in respect of competition law and policy?
We are aware of it, Senator. I guess the comment I'd make is, I mean, we really don't know what was behind that. Was it an attempt to calculate the value in some way? Was it an early attempt to work out how they could block media? I don't know what the objective was, Senator, but given it was an experiment, I mean, there's no breach of the law, but certainly it's very relevant as we think about this code.
So one of my, I guess the line of questioning I've got in relation to algorithm auditing is that the algorithm itself is opaque and has the ability, as has been clearly demonstrated, to skew the search results that could cause harm within the Australian market. I presume you're familiar with the term algorithm auditing, and I just wonder whether or not the ACCC's got any experience in this space. Have you given any thought to the value of the ACCC being able to, on occasions, walk into Google and say, we're going to conduct an audit on your algorithm to ensure there is no market manipulation or competitive bias occurring? Do you have experience in that space? Do you have views on this?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So we are interested in the algorithms to the extent they, as you say, bring about anti-competitive outcomes. We've now got a digital platform unit which is looking at these competition issues. We do have the ability to get information via notices, but also we have the ability to, if we've got a competition concern, if we think there's some competition issue, to sort of throw things at the algorithm, which anyone can do, and just assess it that way. So where we sit at the moment, we're pretty comfortable from a competition point of view that we've got the powers that we need, but certainly it's something we're going to keep an eye on going forward.
Okay, so just to be clear, in my examination of this very preliminary, you already have the powers to basically examine these sorts of things. It may not be done, and in some sense, the amendments that I might propose are not seeking to grant you a new power, but just requiring you to use them on a regular basis to satisfy yourself that there is no breach occurring in a very opaque world where, we've seen, 17 million, 22 million Australians being utilising a service that could skew the market.
Well, at the moment, Senator, where we have what's known in the trade as a reason to believe there's a breach of the Act, then we can use our information gathering powers. And separately, the government's given us a long-term inquiry set of powers, so we can use our information gathering powers more broadly. So I don't want to sound ungrateful, Senator, but at the moment we think we've got the powers we need. I do occasionally like to be the regulator that says we don't need any more, thanks. But look, appreciate the issue, but at the moment I'd say we've probably got the powers we need.
As I said, I'm not trying to give you an extra power. I may, in essence, be saying there's a requirement for you to exercise those powers on some reasonably regular basis or in effect, to audit, as the name suggests, from an anti-competitive, competitive perspective, these very opaque but very important algorithms.
Well, look, that's a policy question I'll leave to you and your colleagues, Senator. Where we sit from a competition point of view, if we've got a reason to believe there's a breach, we can act. So otherwise, that's a policy question I'll leave to you and the committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sims. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Bragg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the ACCC for making yourselves available today. Look, I have a few questions to get through. The first one I have is the way that this legislation works, isn't it accurate to say that the organisations that have been nominated by the Treasurer, in this case that would be Google and Facebook, they can do deals outside of the code, and thereby that obviating the need for the code in their case, isn't it?
Well, they can certainly do deals outside the code, and I would expect personally that there will be many deals done outside the code. But just to be clarified, it doesn't so much obviate the need for the code, if I understand you correctly. I mean, only if the code is there and the news media businesses have the ability to fall back on that arbitration, will you get commercial deals done. But with the code there, my view is that largely we'll get commercial deals. We won't need to rely on the arbitration, if I've understood you correctly, Senator.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, effectively what you said today is that if there wasn't a code in place, that there would be no serious opportunity to have a balanced discussion and ultimately a deal, because there's no need for the major platforms to negotiate because of their immense market power. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely right, Senator. Yes.
Okay. So, so your point is you need the code to drive the parties to the table. I guess I was just trying to make it absolutely clear for the record that if I am Google and I do a deal with a media organisation to pay for media content, I don't have to do that within the code framework. The point is that I have to have a deal of some sort. Is that right?
Absolutely correct again, Senator. Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So I want to take you to this issue of Showcase, Google Showcase. So, I mean, I have to say it was a strange interaction at this committee where effectively what Google was saying was that their solution to the issue at hand was Google Showcase. That's what they were saying to us this morning. But Showcase isn't available in Australia, and a lot of the witnesses today have said that they've had no opportunity to engage with Google on this in detail. So if that is their solution, then isn't it odd that this is something people haven't seen?
Absolutely, Senator. So I guess there's 2 points I could make if I could. One is that if you've got the code with arbitration in relation to the value of news media businesses on search, then as you said earlier, deals can be done outside the code. Those deals could involve Showcase, but given that the news media businesses have the ability to fall back on arbitration for the value in search, you'd expect that the digital platforms would have to show us what the Showcase do. They'd have to lock something in place for 2 or 3 years and so forth. If on the other hand, it's Showcase which is the basis of the arbitration, well, as you say, we don't know what it is. It's in Google's control. How much value there is for Google under the arbitration is completely in Google's control. So really, it doesn't achieve the purpose at all.
So when you say you don't know what Showcase is, you mean the ACCC hasn't been given an opportunity to look at how Showcase will work in Australia?
I'm going to ask Kate to answer that, but my understanding is that as we've kept asking questions about Showcase, we haven't really been able to get to understand it. But Kate, what's your knowledge of what we know about Showcase?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. At a high level, we understand that Showcase is a product where consumers will be able to see the entire articles, and it will be some kind of carousel or link from search that takes people to the Showcase product where they can see the number of articles that are available on there. We haven't seen a live version of it, if you like, but certainly, and we understand the product's been developing. It used to be called Google Discover, I believe, and it's now Google Showcase. So the Google's been developing it over and changing it over time.
Okay, so I mean that makes my next question hard to ask you, because the centrepiece of their testimony is we don't want to have the code, we want to have Showcase, but we're not prepared to show people what Showcase is. So I guess there's nothing else I can really ask you about Showcase if you haven't been given a detailed briefing on how it would work in Australia.
I guess the point I'd make, Senator, is that if the issue is what do you arbitrate about?
Yeah.
If you're arbitrating about the value of news media businesses to search, that's not going anywhere. I mean, that's actually been there for a long time. You know what you're dealing with. They can't take it away. On the other hand, if you're arbitrating in relation to Showcase, what that is and how that evolves is completely in their control. It's a brand new product. As you say, we don't know much about it. So I think Showcase is just not at all suited to arbitration. Only search is. But if they want to do a deal on Showcase with that threat of arbitration in the background, that's fine. But of course, during the course of that deal, they'll have to be explaining to the news media business exactly what Showcase is, and it'll have to be a deal that the news media business is comfortable with.
Okay. So in terms of sizing up this market, when we're talking about $8 billion in online advertising revenue, according to your organisation, 4 billion of which thereabouts goes to Google, and then I think Channel 9 said that they estimate about $600 million.
Sorry, Senator Bragg, we've just lost you.
Through to the publishers.
Senator Bragg, we lost most of that. Could you just ask that question again?
I think I've dropped off, have I?
Senator Bragg, we lost most of that. Could you just ask it again, please?
I was just trying to get a sense of, so if Channel 9 have suggested that the size of the market in terms of the payments that would potentially flow from tech companies to media outfits is about $600 million, does that sound about right to you?
Oh, look, I think the best way I can put that one, Senator, is that there's been various suggestions from the news media businesses and Google and Facebook about what the value is. Google and Facebook occasionally have said, actually, well, you should pay us $200 million rather than the other way around. Nine has put $600 million. Look, I think in both cases, their positioning will only know the true value once you have a proper commercial deal with the code in place. I think it's just too hard at the moment to say what that right number is. It's going to be a substantial sum, but I think there's a bit of positioning going on.
Okay, but I mean, my understanding is that there are already examples in the Australian marketplace, for example, Apple News, where there are payments that are occurring from tech companies to media outfits to pay for journalism. So it's already happening in this jurisdiction, isn't it?
Oh, that's right. I might get Kate to talk about Apple News. There is Apple News is a much smaller vehicle, and so you don't have the bargaining imbalance issue. And I think that largely works okay. Do you want to make a comment on that, Kate?
Yeah. So Apple, our understanding is that Apple News and the Apple News Plus, which is a subscription product, the free Apple News product is a revenue share, and that during the DPI, when we were discussing the revenue share for Apple News with publishers, they raised very few issues with that revenue share arrangement. They seemed pretty happy at that time. I mean, that could have changed, obviously, but at the time of the DPI, they were pretty happy with the revenue share for the free product. The Apple News Plus is a subscription product, and Apple takes a cut, and the rest of the monies go to the various news businesses that are on Apple News Plus.
Yeah, so, but in other words, Apple pays, they're prepared to pay.
Yep.
Right.
That's right, Senator, and that's where you don't have that same bargaining imbalance and you end up with a commercial deal.
Well, I guess they feel they don't need to. Okay, so I just have one more before I ask you a quick set of targeted questions. My last one is just really about this Facebook testimony today. I'm not sure whether you saw any of that, but
yes.
Effectively I asked them whether or not there was any value in having mainstream news from a diverse range of sources on their platforms, whether there was any commercial value, and their answer was that there was no commercial value whatsoever to Facebook. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, I think I have a very different view. Facebook want people on their platform. They want them on the platform. They want them to stay on the platform. They're more likely to be on the platform. They're more likely to stay on the platform if people can get access to mainstream journalist-created news. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's interested in that, but clearly enough people are that, there's a number of people who the way they get their news is through their Facebook news feed. Interesting, it's called news feed. Of course, they get a whole lot of other things through that as well, exchanging things with friends and all the rest. But there's no doubt that part of what you get is a feed of news relevant to what you're interested in, news that's been provided by journalists that gets more people on the platform and that has them on the platform for longer. If news was, if journalist-created news wasn't on the platform, people would not be on the platform for as long, and they'd probably go to some other place to get their news. So I think it's clearly a value.
So why would Facebook come before the Australian Parliament and say that there's no commercial value with this news?
I can only think, Senator, they're talking about how much advertising they judge they do against that news content. Of course, if somebody's talking about running shoes and that's what they're exchanging information on, and then all of a sudden there's an ad for running shoes, I can see that ads that could be more easily sold when you're dealing with some product that you might want to buy. And so in that sense, they might say, well, I can't advertise as much against a story about COVID-19. But I think that ignores the fact that people are attracted to the platform because of the breadth of what the platform provides. So I just have a different view, Senator, to Facebook.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to quickly, hopefully run through these quick points. So effectively, Facebook and Google put out a statement, an open letter it was, saying that there were a number of reasons why they couldn't support the code. And this is before it became the final code. So I might just quickly run through those. There's 8 points and just get your quick answer. The first reason Facebook said they wouldn't support the code was they said it would ignore the benefits news media businesses get from using Facebook for free to distribute their stories.
That's been addressed, Senator.
Okay.
There's now a two-way value exchange. That's been addressed.
Thank you. Second one was Facebook said it creates one-sided binding arbitration processes which force Facebook to pay for news at a level far beyond its value to Facebook and what they already invest in news.
I think that if there's a question of how much value, that's for the arbitrator to determine. I mean, hopefully it'll get determined through commercial negotiation, but if not, arbitrate. I mean, if Facebook really believes there's no value there, then put that case to the arbitrator. You've got a process to make your case.
Okay. The third point was they said that it intervenes in significant aspects of commercial relationships between platforms and news businesses. Has that been addressed in the final code?
I think that is the fundamental point, Senator. You cannot, I've been involved in negotiations for 45 years. I know I don't look that old, but you can't have a commercial negotiation when you've got this one-sided trying to deal with what is essentially a monopoly. So this will allow commercial negotiations. I mean, every monopoly I've ever come across says, don't regulate us, leave it for commercial negotiation. What they mean is leave it to a take it or leave it position because we're the monopoly. So the only way you'll get a commercial deal is if you've got some muscle in the arm of the news media businesses. That muscle is the code. I'm not saying it equals things up, but it certainly helps. And so that's the only way. The code is the only way you get commercial deals.
Okay, the fourth thing is they said that it gives news businesses unprecedented notice of product updates.
Well, look, there was that provision in July, which has been substantially changed. And we thought it had been changed in a way that met what Google and Facebook were requesting. So now instead of 28 days notice, it's 14 days notice. But much more importantly, it's got to be something, a significant planned change. It can't just be algorithmically generated. So the hurdle for letting people know is really quite high. So we thought we listened very carefully. That's why this has been a long process. We thought the code as drafted, we feel, addresses their concern.
And the last issue Facebook had was that they said that it hits services which are not news products.
Well, I don't see that. I think, Facebook was saying they'd have to deal with thousands of publishers or 1,000 publishers. I mean, the only people who've got to deal with are people who produce core news. And I don't think there'll be that many negotiations at all. I'd imagine the people who appeared today, News Corp 9 and The Guardian, will probably want to negotiate separately, but there'll be a lot of collective bargaining. But the only companies that are allowed to bargain are those who produce core news. So if you don't produce core news, I'm sorry, you don't get on the playing field. So there's not that many people they're going to have to deal with.
Okay, and Google just had 3 issues from their letter in August about the draft code. The first issue was the law would force Google to give an unfair advantage to news media businesses by giving NMBs access to information ahead of other businesses.
I might just pass to Kate on that, but I've got a feeling that information clause is not there. Is that right, Kate?
It's talking about algorithm change. I'm assuming that's what they're referring to with that. As Rod has previously said, that's been substantially changed. The time frames and also the hurdle has been substantially changed. I mean, the point of that provision was to deal with circumstances such as the change that Facebook made a number of years ago to increase meaningful engagement, which substantially affected published flows to third parties like publisher traffic. It's that kind of algorithm change that we're potentially interested in capturing.
And the only other information exchange, Senator, is going back to Senator Patrick's points. There is an information exchange process in the arbitration so that the news media businesses have a little bit of information around which they can put their value bid into the arbitration process. But that only comes once you've got arbitration triggered.
Okay, and then the second point they made in August about the draft code was under the law, Google would have to tell NMB how they gain access to data about use of Google products.
Kate, I might get you to deal with that one. I mean, I'm just a bit confused about that.
I'm assuming that that's reference to the user data point.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, Rod, you go ahead. I'm sure you've.
Oh, well, look, the user data issue, we thought the July code was drafted in a way that meant they didn't have to provide the data they thought they had to provide. Now we've clarified it. So under the current code, there is just no requirement for them to provide data they don't want to provide. So that issue's been completely dealt with.
Okay, and the final one is about, I think, two-way value. Google said that they already pay tens of millions of dollars and send billions of free clicks to NMBs every year.
And that has been completely dealt with. We've gone from one-way to two-way. So those last 3 points, Senator, we've gone two-way value exchange. There's no need to pass to provide data to the news media businesses, and we believe we've fixed the algorithm change notice issues. So those 3 points that you raised, which I agree was the issues raised by Google in relation to the draft code, we believe they've all been completely addressed.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, one of the things that Facebook did raise with us today is this issue of the non-differentiation clause and the impact on arrangements in relation to paywalls for those who have a paywall and but users not being able to take advantage of that. Is that your understanding of the way the legislation is, or is there some way we could deal with that?
No, it's not my understanding, Senator. I must say, to be honest, listening to Facebook's interpretation of the non-differentiation provision, What they were saying about it just did not match my understanding at all. Happy to have another discussion with them to talk about that. But the non-differentiation simply says, and Kate can pick up if she's got anything to add, it simply says don't differentiate, or in other words, punish people on the basis of whether or not they're taking advantage of the code. So if someone takes advantage of the code, there shouldn't be an ability to punish them or demote them. All the experiments that, the trials that were being talked about this morning, they can do that. They can come up with different commercial arrangements. There's nothing wrong with that. What you can't do is punish someone because of their involvement in the code or reward somebody because they haven't been involved in the code.
So Google's, just jumping to Google's evidence then this morning, where they argued that they had to run this experiment now, that it was simply it wasn't being used as a, shot across the bow. It was so that they could work out how to operate that particular model if indeed the code passes. You're saying that type of testing wouldn't be precluded in the future under this code?
Provided it wasn't punishing people for their involvement in the code. That's what's not allowed. If I could just mention that there's two foundations of the code. One is the arbitration, because that essentially more evens up the bargaining power, the only way you get commercial deals, so you need the arbitration. And the other one is the non-differentiation, so that they can't pick people off. The bargaining imbalance is not that Facebook and Google don't need media. They need media. They just don't need any individual media company. So you've got to have the non-differentiation clause so that they can't punish people for being involved in the code and reward those who don't want to be involved in the code. So it's fundamental in that sense. I don't, I've only read about the experiments. I wasn't on the receiving end of them, Senator. So, but I don't think they would trigger any issues with the code.
You weren't in the 1% of Australians who had the ABC blocked from their news, from their search feed.
I'm afraid my news was happily coming through. I'm a very diverse media user. ABC, just about all the people, I read the media from all the people that have been on today.
Well, it sounds like, so what you're saying is that the non-differentiation clause, it's really there to avoid the age-old divide and conquer.
Exactly. A good way to put it. Thank you, Senator. Yes.
Could I ask, in relation to one of the criticisms that is constantly and consistently being put forward, and that is that this is really just a war between two big companies. There's a war between Murdoch's News Corporation and Google, and the government's picking their mate. And you've had to inquire into this. Surely you've had to deal with this issue. Murdoch, the Murdoch Press, News Corporation, do have a significant market share of the journalism in Australia. And how do you balance that concern with what you've put forward to the Parliament, or put forward to the government that has now come to the Parliament?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So, first of all, of course, I just love the way Google's been able to portray News Limited as the big company and they're just the little guy. Google's 100 times bigger than News Limited worldwide. So, compared to Google, Google's the Goliath and News Limited's the David. The point I'd make, though, is that this is applying to all news media businesses. It's all core news. Collective bargaining is there so that the smaller players can have strong bargaining power by coming together. It's going to benefit The Guardian, as you heard, who are 7 years entrance into the market, but it's going to benefit the smaller players. And we've spoken to a large number of them. They're looking forward to the code. How much they'll band together, I don't know, but I think the really small ones will absolutely band together. So, look, the way people get their news has changed. Obviously, they get it from television, they get it from radio, and they get it from print. But these days, the way we think of it, we call it print online, because a lot of people are reading what used to be newspapers, be it the Daily Telegraph or the SMH, online. I mean, I read the digital edition, but many people will just go to the website. But when you think about that, the ABC is now print online. I get a twice-a-day feed from the ABC. I get other news from the ABC all day, and it's all written down, and I read it. And that news feed is quite a long one. It's a written document. I'm not saying it's a substitute for a newspaper, but you're getting news from so many different sources now. So I think the internet and print online. I mean, I also get the New York Times. I get the Financial Times. So there's a wide range of places you can go to get news. But the code is designed to lift up all media businesses, and collective bargaining will certainly allow the smaller players to play just as well as it will allow News Limited and Nine to play.
You are, the competition watchdog. Do you see that there is a problem with media concentration in Australia?
We'd always want, again, Senator, it depends on the market. So if you think about the market as the market for print online, then you've got the market. So if you think about the market for just newspapers, you go and buy a newspaper. My understanding is News Corp's got 65 or 70% of the newspaper market, and that's obviously a dominant position. As a competition regulator, we'd prefer there was much more diversity in that. So in terms of newspaper market, totally agree, and we'd like more competition. If you think about print online, then you do have the ABC, you certainly have the Guardian, you have the Daily Mail, Nine, NSM, MSN. You've got a range of players. The way people get their news, and again, it depends on the market, they get it off TV, they get it off radio, as well as print online. So it really depends on the market. But yes, we'd like more diversity in relation to newspapers. But I would say compared to when, if you look back, we've probably got more diversity than we used to have because of the internet, because you can have print online now.
We heard earlier today when we had the media panel, the panel of media publishers, particularly the print in front of us, that AAP obviously not in the code. They describe themselves as more the wholesaler of public interest journalism, and this code deals with the retail arm per se. What do we do about making sure that if this is let me step back. If this code is designed to ensure public interest journalism is sustainable in Australia because it is a public good, what do we need to do to make sure a fundamental part of that ecosystem, the wholesale arm, is sustainable as well? And the last thing we want to do is have that fall over, surely.
I totally agree, Senator. In our digital platform inquiry, we said the code was a necessary part of sustaining public interest journalism, but it was not sufficient. So we argued for a fund of money that would be able to be contributing to public interest journalism, particularly in rural and regional areas. And rural and regional areas depend a hell of a lot on AAP. I mean, of course, having AAP, if you're thinking about court reporting as a classic example, or local council reporting, of course you're not going to send 5 journalists to that. You need, in many cases, 1 journalist to go who can then distribute it to everybody, and that's what AAP does. So AAP plays a fundamental role. We never saw the code as dealing with that. We saw that more as the other mechanism of providing some very well targeted, well thought through funding to deal with the other media issues that can't be dealt with by the code. So the code is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Is there a role for government to ensure that the newswire of AAP is funded? Then you're suggesting some type of support fund. You're saying that should be public money?
Oh, look, I agree with your earlier statement, Senator, that we need a newswire.
Yeah.
Not only is it that single player, but it provides news internationally, so it's absolutely fundamental. I mean, in the past, it's been supported because all the media got their news from it. As we now know, not all entities, particularly News Limited and Nine, are getting their news from AAP, and that's affected the viability. Look, it's very much a policy question, Senator, but I think something's got to be done. Quite what has to be done, I think, needs to be looked at very closely.
Just to be okay, just to summarise though, what you're saying is that this code deals with one element of the public interest journalism ecosystem, but it doesn't deal with it all. There is still more work to be done.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the code doesn't solve everything, and the code is a really important component of that. But yes, there's other things to be done, as we recommended in our report.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, we will finish up in a second. I do have one question, but I will point out that the government has made a contribution via the ping to the AAP and to other regional journalism outlets. So I don't think there's been nothing done in that space, but I'm happy to continue that conversation elsewhere. Just to close off on the questions from Senator Bragg, Mr Sims, are you saying that the problems as set out by Google and Facebook in August with the code at that point, from your position, have been addressed by the legislation that's currently before this committee?
In my view, the problems that we heard from Google have been addressed. Facebook always took the position, certainly in meetings I was in, and I wasn't in all of them, but I remember one meeting in particular when we talked about the form of arbitration, and Facebook just said, we don't want any arbitration. So that Facebook, I guess, have been fairly consistent in not wanting any arbitration. So I think it's fair to say they have been consistent on that, and that hasn't been addressed. But the original Google issues in August, they have been addressed.
Okay, so what we've heard then in the new issues that have been raised, is this merely shifting the goalposts?
Look, it has been interesting, Senator. We, in the July version, had what was then Google Discover, which I think is now Google Showcase. We had that absolutely in the code where you could arbitrate about search as well as arbitrate about Google Discover. Google was adamant they wanted that out, and they only wanted the code to cover search. Now they don't want search in, they want Google Discover in. So, look, I think it has been a bit of a journey, Senator, but I think the common thing is that basically Google and Facebook would rather not have the code. But to be fair to Facebook, as I say, they've been consistent in not wanting arbitration.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, that concludes today's hearings. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of those who have made submissions and sent representatives here today. There will be a second day of hearings on the 1st of February, so we'll see many of you here again then. I thank Hansard Broadcasting and the Secretariat as always, and on that note, the committee stands adjourned.